Hello guys, welcome! This is the patch 2.3b tier list, and I have updated it from last patch. I'm not waiting as long to do this time round because I'm going to do one now, and I'm going to do one after Senna and Lucian release. But for the time being, this is where I feel the meta is at, based on the changes and based on talking to some players and having some games myself. Okay, so what we need to talk about is how to read this tier list. S are your very good picks, and it goes all the way down to C, which are kind of like considered bad or not quite right for solo queue. Some picks that are down low you might see in competitive because they are better in competitive situations, like Ziggs AD carry for instance, but they can be a little bit difficult to pull out in solo queue, especially across every elo. So from S to C, S is best, C is worst. And then you read the tier lists from top to bottom. So you'll notice that there are some crossovers, some portraits crossover between the tiers. That is just because they are somewhere in between. So you're essentially reading this tier list from top to bottom, from left to right. And that kind of gives you the relative strength of all the champions in that particular role. You'll also notice that I have some rune icons on each of the champions, and you'll notice that the Lux picture at the top kind of tells you what it is. The first rune on the bottom left is the optimal rune that is used in most scenarios. The second rune is used in some matchups or is a particular build rune. And the third rune is, again, similar to the second rune, but a little bit more niche, used in very certain builds and certain scenarios. There'll be some coloured borders around the champions as well. Red being a skilled player champion or a one-trick champion. Green being a relatively safe blind pick, so you can pick it into any matchup and it might be okay. Yellow being, I've watched esports, and why is this pick not really high on the tier list? Because it's mostly for a competitive pick. Coordinated teams that know how to use the pick make it look stronger than it is. So that's just for any of you that are watching esports and are wondering why some of these picks are not highlighted. And no, Fiora Jungle is not going down as a competitive pick. That's going down as a pure pick for that particular player. Let's get into the tier list then, starting off in the Baron lane. And Fiora untouched, she is still the top queen of the Baron lane. I actually probably should have put her a little bit above Gragas, but there really wasn't space on my graphic. Fiora is just the best outright Baron laner in the game right now. She beats Gragas pretty hard. Most matchups you're going to take the Grasp of the Undying into. There are very few matchups that you would take Conqueror right now, but it is a rune that you can use. Gragas is obviously the best tank in the meta now, so Gragas still remains a very strong pick with Grasp. You can go full AP with the Electrocute, or you can run Phase Rush if you really want to have the ability to get to the back line or just have a bit more movement in team fights. The big story, though, is that Garen is not in the dumpster. No, I've talked to a lot of Baron laners and I've played him a bit, and he still wins the matchups that he always won. He's not garbage, he's just not broken. And I think that's probably the area that Garen needs to stay. I think he's okay now. I think a lot of people saying that you can build Black Cleaver into full tank and you do a similar amount of damage. It just means you're not as tanky in the early mid game, which is probably completely fine. So Garen's not a dumpster. He's just not OP. He's just decent. He's like in the line of Renekton. You know, Renekton's decent. Renekton's not OP. Garen's decent. He's not OP. Another big change. Riven has moved up a little bit. The shield buff definitely helped her. And also, I don't know if you noticed at the bottom there, we're actually seeing Vayne come in a little bit further up the tier list now. Yeah, the Silver Bolts changes actually helped Vayne more than any other champion. Or in any other role. I don't think those Silver Bolts changes massively impacted her bot lane, for instance. However, it did really impact her Baron lane capabilities because she's much more likely to get 3 basic attacks on a melee champion than she is in a bot lane matchup. And of course, things like the Darius are still solid. Akali is okay, but not as good in the Baron Initiate mid lane. The Irelia buffs put her up into A tier over B tier, but I still don't think Irelia is best in the Baron lane. I still think she's better placed in the mid lane. Other sort of picks that you might notice, Teemo, he's got a red ring around him. Teemos can be very obnoxious, can still be very strong, but they are not exactly strong in a teamfight situation. And then Tryndamere, as always, is not massively strong. There hasn't been many crazy sweeping changes to the Baron lane. Vayne moving up, Riven and Aurelia moving up a little bit, Garen moving down. They're all pretty indicative of the changes that we saw in the patch. So it hasn't been like a wild sweeping change, you know, to the Baron lane. Most of the picks that you played before are going to remain pretty decent. So don't worry too much about that. All right, let's take a look over at the jungle now, and some changes that you need to be aware of, but the only change that isn't going to shock anyone is Lee Sin is still the top dog. No changes to Lee Sin. He remains very, very strong. Kha'Zix's got a 5 damage nerf on his Taste Their Fear, which is not a big nerf in the slightest, and he's going to remain good in solo queue. The big shift is the switch between Xin Zhao and Fizz. Xin Zhao is an incredibly strong jungler. I underrated him on the last patch. We saw a video that I put out, talked about the strength of Xin Zhao. Xin Zhao's super good. Very, very, very strong jungler that you should try and play in your games, but he still loses to things like Lee Sin, so you do have to be a little careful. Fizz has dropped down because his clear speed's a lot slower. I talked to I'm the Doom, who was the guy who kind of really started to use Fizz quite frequently in his games, and he basically said he's one camp slower, and he definitely is really weak to Lee Sin, but he's still very playable. So, you know, that to me felt like an A-tier jungler. He doesn't feel super strong anymore. He feels like good. And I think in solo queue games, you can still make him work. But I overreacted to the damage changes in the jungle. But I still don't think I agree that they were the right things to change for him. I think his clear speed probably wasn't the problem. I think his ultimate cooldown was the problem and the damage that he was outputting. But he feels like a fine jungler now. You just have to be a little careful that some of the junglers that will invade you, like maybe Evelynn or Lee Sin, they can do it much more easily now, and you go much lower in the jungle. So you take a lot more damage because your clear speed's a little slower. So just be aware of that. That is important to note with his jungle. But other than that, there wasn't really many other jungle changes to talk of note. No one else got hit particularly hard in this particular role. So what you're going to see is that jungle hasn't shifted massively. I think, you know, Jarvan might be the most underrated jungler on this list. He might be deserving of an S tier slot, but it depends how you build him, and he can be a bit hit or miss as well. Like, he's one of those junglers that really relies on getting his team into a good spot because he's not like a solo carry jungler, whereas people like Kha'Zix, Xin Zhao, Evelynn, Camille, Lee Sin, they can all solo carry pretty hard. So that's why, like, Jarvan's a bit more of a team player jungler, but he is very, very, very strong. And, you know, I think if you're looking for a jungler that is quite easy to play and is really good at facilitating your team, then Jarvan is definitely the one. In terms of down the list, the the Rammus changes, I think I've read a lot of Rammus mains saying the changes are pretty, like, grim, and they have hurt him quite a lot. But, sorry. I'm so tired today. I don't think that it changes his position in the tier list a massive amount. He already, at high levels, wasn't massively used and wasn't, like, considered a super high tier. At the end of the day, he probably had a relatively low sample size. They said that his win rate was really high across the board, but I imagine that, especially at the higher levels, the sample size was probably a little bit lower. But I don't, you know, I think Rammus is a very close. I've been told he has the slowest clear speed in the game now. And that a slow clear speed and high elo just means you're going to fall behind way too hard. And so I just don't think that Rammus is a super viable pick. Obviously, we have things like the Mundo, which is okay, and Diana, which can still be used. Tryndamere and Yi. I should put Yi on this list, really. I really should put Master Yi on this list. Tell you what, guys, we're going to put Master Yi on this list. Give me a second. All right, there we go. He's on the list, everybody. Master Yi. And you play him with Conqueror most of the time. You can probably also play him with Fleet Footwork. But either way, don't play Master Yi. But he is on the list. So, oh no, get away, Master Yi. You don't want to come up to mid lane. There's no way you're playing Master Yi in mid lane. Mid lane is an interesting one. It just feels like mid lane has got so many viable champions, but nothing is like extremely OP. I think that the Aurelia changes have made her good. Like, I think they've made her, like, pretty solid. But the thing with Aurelia is she's quite hard to play. So, like, you'll find that if you try and play her at low elos, you might not feel like she's insane. But the Aurelia changes were pretty big. And I think they will... they probably will make her a standout mid laner, especially with the armor nerf to Ziggs, Twisted Fate, and Katarina. they're all gonna feel that armor nerf quite heavily, and so that's where the Aurelia is really going to shine. But there is just a lot of viable picks in mid lane right now. You'll notice that there's 8 picks that populate S tier because they're all good. Like, they're all really good picks, and all of them can be used in. I think one thing that I would say is that Diana hasn't really been heavily part of the meta, but she hasn't changed, and so I still think she's like a viable pick. I think the way that someone described it to me was like, yeah, Diana was really like high priority when Katarina was really high priority because it was a good answer into Katarina, which makes a lot of sense to me. But I still think Diana is a very viable and valuable pick. Her ultimate is still game changing. And I think that, you know, she still deserves like a high spot on a tier list because realistically nothing major has changed with her. And I think people just kind of have moved away from her, but I do think she's a bit underrated. However, you know, with the armor nerfs and sort of champions that you might want to think about playing into Aurelia, maybe, you know, Diana. I don't think Diana has a great matchup into Aurelia, but, you know, she might creep back into the meta a little bit because of some of the nerfs to the big armor values on some of the high tier picks. Katarina, still okay. She can still carry games. I've moved up quite a few AD mid laners. You'll notice that I've moved up Yasuo, Zed, Pantheon pretty far up. Renekton and Riven. All those armor changes on some of those key champions means that these could be a bit more viable. So for instance, if you see a Twisted Fate, a Katarina, especially a Katarina, a Ziggs, you might want to consider picking up like the Riven or the Pantheon, for instance, or even the Renekton. The Renekton's a great pick into the Katarina, but otherwise the mid lane tier list hasn't shifted too much. I moved Seraphine down just because it's not as strong of a solo queue pick. It's a little bit more sort of focused on competitive, but I think the mid lane tier list, you can see there's a huge number of viable picks, and there's lots of things for you to choose from if you're playing in the mid lane. AD carry wise, I don't think the changes really affected Vayne AD carry's position. I think it's made her a better Baron laner, but it probably hasn't affected her AD carry slot too much. And honestly, nothing really changed. They didn't nerf Kai'Sa, they didn't nerf Ezreal. No nerfs to pretty much anything on this AD carry list apart from Jinx. And the only thing they changed on Jinx was the Super Mega Death Rocket steal potential, but it doesn't make her that any less good of an AD carry. I haven't moved Draven up because I felt that the Draven's position was fair in the first place. Draven is one of those champions that still, yeah, he got buffs, and I think it's going to make solo queue Draven strong, but you still need, like, you can still deal with him by just trying not to die and playing safe versus Draven. It's only the laning phase that I think got hit massively by that Blood Rush buff, and the laning phase is over pretty quickly. So whilst I think Draven was almost on the verge of being pushed up, I don't think it suddenly made him like S tier. I just think it makes him more obnoxious to play against, which is really annoying. Just because I rant and rave about something being strong, like a change, doesn't mean that they're going to suddenly shoot up to S plus tier in the tier list. It just means that it makes them more awkward and annoying to play against, which, you know, that's an issue with Draven right now. I think he's just become a little bit more awkward and a little bit more annoying to play against. But if I'm thinking what fits a team best in most scenarios, I'm not going to be slapping Draven in every composition. You know, I'd much rather have the consistency of a Kai'Sa, the consistency of an Ezreal, a Xayah, or whatever. I just think Draven still is very like feast or famine, but they've made him slightly easier to feast. But obviously he's not as consistent as the things that you see above him, like the Varus, the Xayah, the Jinx, the Kai'Sa, and the Ezreal. And guess what? Nothing changed on supports. They absolutely zero changed on supports because they didn't change any supports this patch, apart from actually, they didn't even change Pantheon, did they? Let me just check. I will go back to the patch notes. I don't think they changed anything on supports this patch. No support changes in the slightest. So, to be honest with you, no changes to the support tier list. It remains the way that I kind of felt it was beforehand. There's lots of good supports, still dominated by Janna and Braum realistically. But Font of Life is making a lot of supports really strong. And yeah, I don't think anything massively changes. I'm really loving playing Rakan right now. Rakan I should have added Font of Life Rakan. Font of Life Rakan is a thing. It's pretty good. But yeah, I'm really loving playing Rakan right now. But that's the overall vibe. Again, nothing really changed on the support tier list. You notice that you've got some top tier picks. You've got some picks that drop down a little bit. I think Blitzcrank's a little bit underrated again because Enchanter meta does mean that Blitzcrank gets strong, but you just need to hit the hooks, which can be a little difficult. And again, I'm never a big fan of the kind of like the Malphites and the Annies because they're level 5 supports, and I don't really like level 5 supports. Soraka could be good. I'm still kind of evaluating Soraka. I'm not sure where she sits, but that's the overall tier list. It's going to change when Senna and Lucian come out. I'm gonna drop another tier list next week when Senna and Lucian come out. But hopefully that was useful for you guys. Remember to take a screenshot so you can look at it and see how you think. And I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions. The biggest shock is that Garen isn't bad. Garen's decent. He's just a good Baron laner, but he's not OP, and I think that's the main thing. I think Garen's just not strictly OP. I just think he's a good Baron laner now, which is a good thing, and I think that's the change that Garen needed realistically. Cool. Anyway, I'll see you later, guys. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell if you enjoyed the content, and I will see you soon.